I think the key research discovery in heart math has been the connection from the heart to the brain. Traditionally, we've learned that the brain is in charge of everything, that all the signals come down from the brain, and that the brain is in fact the master computer, that its signals come down and influence the heart and the rest of the body too. The most fascinating thing for me is that the heart, which is in my area of expertise, is the mainframe. It sends abundant signals to the brain, which then sends signals all over the body. It sets the tone. And the interaction of the heart with the brain allows higher centers in the brain to function differently. This bit of information, I think, is the most central piece of research to come out of this area.
The source of the heartbeat is within the heart itself. In the many presentations I've done over the years, I find that about half the people in the audience believe that the brain sends a signal down to the heart, and that is what makes the heartbeat. That's clearly not the case, however. The source of the heartbeat is truly within the heart itself. Electrically speaking, the heart generates by far the largest rhythmic electrical signal in our body. It's about 40 to 60 times more amplitude than what the brain waves are. So every time the heart beats, that electrical wave, the electrical energy, permeates every cell in our body. We can measure the heartbeat, called the electrocardiogram, by putting an electrode on your little toe, your earlobe, anywhere. So that electrical energy is binding together, in a way, all the cells in the body.
We need to learn that our heart has a very central role in setting our emotions, setting our responses, even our perceptions, and setting the entire internal milieu. In other words, there's a different type of physiology that's created by a heart signal that has one pattern compared to a heart signal that has the other pattern. In terms of health, which physiology do we want to bathe ourselves in? Do we want to bathe ourselves in stressful physiology that creates the production of lots of hormones that raise our blood pressure and have many other widespread effects? Or do we want to bathe ourselves in the type of physiology that's really quite beneficial to us?
There are many nerve pathways sending information back to the brain from the body. These are called sensory systems. They sense things. What's our blood chemistry? How much air is in the lungs? These types of things. They are a very important part of our physiology. As it turns out, the heart is uniquely connected to the brain and is truly a sensory organ. It senses things. So it's not just the brain sending information down to the heart. The heart also sends information through the nervous system back to the brain as well. When we record the actual nerves, the heart sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. So it's truly a two-way communication system. They are two independent main organs that affect each other. Certainly, if we perceive something as stressful or fearful, that will send signals down to the heart and the rest of the body that will change the way the heart's beating and the patterns of it. But also changes within the heart affect the way the brain processes as well. The story gets a lot more interesting, though. Starting back in the 1960s, researchers started developing equipment and ways of looking more closely at these interactions. And what they found was that the information the heart sends to the brain did a lot more than just regulating basic physiological functions in the body. In fact, these signals cascaded up into our higher brain centers and affected our perception, even our visual fields, the way we thought and felt. They came up with two terms to describe the effects the heart was having on our cortex and brain function. One is called cortical inhibition, and the other cortical facilitation. In other words, certain types of information that the heart is sending to the brain literally inhibits the way our brain functions or facilitates it. In the writings of these researchers, they described the heart as if the heart had a mind of its own. But what they didn't know then, and what we know now, is that the heart has a very complex nervous system of its own. We now have to talk about the heart as having its own intrinsic brain. And there's a whole new field that studies this. It's called neurocardiology. So there's a very complex nervous system and brain within the heart itself that can and does function independent of the brain. It's why a heart transplant can work. That little brain in the heart goes with the heart when it's transplanted. An important new tool for looking at how the information flows between the heart and the brain, which helps us start to understand and unravel some of the mysteries here, is a technique that we call heart rate variability, or heart rhythm analysis. When we plot our heart rhythms over time, we find that our heart rate, if we're healthy, changes with every heartbeat, and complex patterns emerge. These patterns are different based on how we're feeling. So now that we know we have a nervous system in our heart, and this communication system exists, we can start to understand why we associate our hearts with feelings. When we ask people where they experience positive feelings, most people point to their chest. So now we're starting to understand why that's true. There really is a nervous system and a little brain in the heart and a whole communication system that explains this. So by looking at our heart rhythms, we can start to unravel this information flow. For example, when we get frustrated or angry, really any type of negative emotion, the rhythmic beating patterns start to look jerky and edgy, much more so than a normal pattern would. This effect on our brain is to inhibit the cortex, so we can't think as clearly. So this is the physiology of why when we're angry or upset, we don't make decisions as well as we would have if we were calm.
Heart rate variability, as it turns out, has a couple of different signatures, if you will. There are a couple of different patterns. When the heart rate variability signal has a certain signature, it may look sort of jaggedy and rough. It's sort of a marker for our emotional state and our biochemical state inside. Heart rate variability can have a markedly different signature, however. And when it assumes a very regular waveform, like a sine wave, it's actually sending a different type of information to our body and to our brain. This information has a lot to do with how we feel, and it's also set by how we feel. In other words, a positive emotional state can change this signature that we are measuring with the heart rate variability tool, and we can see how it sends a different pattern throughout the system. Now the key is, how do we switch it from one pattern to another? That's the basis of the heart math techniques. Once we learn to throw the switch, we can alter the information that spreads throughout our bodies. In terms of wellness, in terms of an opportunity to interrupt certain physiology and promote beneficial physiology, we now have a simple process that will allow us to cross over from one type of signal to another, and do it quite easily.